Unlock the door with me. It's my very first home, my hands shaking, but my heart beats louder. There's this mix of excitement and fear as I step inside. Bright windows light up the hardwood floor, and I stare at the winding banister I've only seen in photos. But the basement, it's almost like a mystery, dark with a twisty hallway and a low ceiling. What kinds of hidden surprises are behind those shadows? This is just the start of everything. Stepping into that empty house for the very first time felt like stepping into someone else's life. A life I'd always wanted but never thought I'd actually get to live. The front door swung shut with a gentle thud, and for a moment there was this peaceful, echoing silence. The air even smelled different, like dust, pine cleaner, a hint of old carpet, and underneath it all, something that just felt new and full of possibility. There was a pile of boxes by the entryway, and even though the movers offered to help, I wanted to take this part slow, unpack my very first home, one box at a time. The kitchen was the heart of it all. Sunlight poured through the window above the sink, catching on old ceramic tiles that had probably seen hundreds of family meals. My coffee maker, toaster, and that one trusty frying pan were the first things I unpacked. Each item set gently on the counter felt like a little victory. I stacked dish towels in the drawer, organizing with that special kind of excitement only found in new beginnings. The cupboards smelled like a mix of wood and lemon-scented shelf liners. Every time I closed a cupboard door, I grinned. This was mine. As the day went on, the living room slowly lost its maze of boxes and took on a sense of place. I'd drag over an old armchair, then step back and imagine mornings spent with a coffee mug balanced on my knee. The family's boxes were everywhere, stacks labeled winter coats, Halloween costumes, sports gear. I carried each one to the basement, grateful for how cool and dim it was down there while the rest of the house baked in the late afternoon sun. The basement had this odd layout, with a narrow hallway bending around the furnace and a ceiling just low enough to make you duck in spots. It was the perfect spot for anything we didn't need right away. Sometimes, the kids would zip around upstairs, squealing and exploring every nook, but downstairs was always still and quiet. I set boxes on plastic shelving, made a mental note to buy more bins, and tried to ignore the spiderweb in the corner behind the water heater. There was a smell down there too, deep earth, laundry soap, cold stone. It felt safe, but a little mysterious, like the past and future were both tucked behind those cement walls. As we settled in, the routines started to form without anyone really planning them. Mornings began with sunlight pooling across the living room rug. I'd wake up early, pad down to the kitchen in slippers, and start a pot of coffee. Just like always, but now the room was my own. I'd press my hand against the cool granite counters and watch the backyard squirrels from the window. Sometimes I'd see my own reflection in the glass, still surprised to find myself standing there, with so much ahead to figure out. Breakfast happened with cereal bowls clattering, toast pressed down in the ancient toaster, and a rush of backpacks at the door. Evenings became their own kind of ritual, windows cracked for a breeze, dinner bubbling on the stove, someone's laughter bouncing down the hall while I tucked groceries away. There was this gentle rhythm forming. It made everything feel calmer, safer, even on the days I worried if we'd really thought of every detail. I always tried to be careful, double-checking the locks every night and making sure the basement light was off. The place was old, sure, but nothing about it seemed threatening. The floors creaked just enough to let you know where people were. When wind rattled the back porch, I'd glance up from my book and smile, telling myself it was just the house settling around us. Sometimes I'd pause on the stairs after tucking the kids in and just listen. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the gentle click of the thermostat, all the tiny background noises that proved we were safe inside. For the kids, there was a new neighborhood to explore. They'd come skidding through the side door, faces red from running, chattering about the neighbor's cat or the funny shape their new friend drew with sidewalk chalk. I'd hang their backpacks in the mudroom and enjoy the simple pleasure of having a place for everything. Even the chaos felt a little more contained, a little more manageable. Unpacking turned into rearranging, which turned into cleaning projects I hadn't expected to tackle. scrubbing mysterious stains behind the stove, peeling shelf paper out of drawers, wiping fingerprints off glass I didn't even remember touching. Each hour spent made the house feel more lived in, less like someone else's and more like ours. I hung up family photos in the hallway, even if the frames didn't match. I didn't care. They belonged there. One afternoon, I even took a break from unpacking just to sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, listening to the distant sound of a lawnmower humming next door, mingling with birdsong just outside our window. The kids burst in, breathless and dirt-smudged, rattling off stories about racing leaves down the curb and discovering a patch of wild violets in the backyard. There was a real joy in seeing them make these little discoveries, their laughter echoing easily through the hallway. I found myself wondering, will this always feel this fresh and promising? The walls might not have been painted yet, and our furniture was a strange patchwork, but somehow, it all fit. A beautiful, messy work in progress. I found myself standing at the window some afternoons, letting the late sun warm my face, and feeling a peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The house might be a jumble of unpacked boxes and old hardwood at that moment, but it felt like a fortress. My fortress. Even if the garden was tangled and the paint needed touch-ups, I felt proud of what we'd started. It was a kind of pride I'd never really felt before, the pride of taking care of something entirely mine. At night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I'd give the place one last walk through. I'd check that the back door was bolted. I'd flick off the hallway lights and listen for the gentle tick of the basement pipes. I'd catch my own tired face in the mirror and smile. Sometimes, I'd whisper goodnight to the house itself. It sounds silly, but it started to feel like this place was listening, welcoming us in. One rainy week, the basement smell deepened, and I found myself worrying for a second about mold or leaks, but everything held together. I inspected every corner with a flashlight, almost enjoying the adventure of finding small cracks, new to-do list items. Upstairs, the sound of rain on the roof only made the living room feel cozier, and I found myself grabbing a blanket and settling in with a mug of tea. Comfort had a whole new meaning. In those first few weeks, it was easy to focus on the good, to feel shielded from the world. There was nothing but the safe sounds of family, the gentle routines of lighting candles for dinner, the muffled closing of the dishwasher. I guess I let myself believe the only surprises would be good ones. Every little echo, every shadow in the corner, I didn't worry, thinking it was all just part of moving in. But things were about to change. It was subtle at first, just a few strange moments here and there. Still, I told myself, what could possibly go wrong in a place that finally felt like home? But that wasn't even the strangest part. Just as I was starting to feel settled, I began to notice the little things that I'd somehow missed in the excitement. A tiny nick in the banister I hadn't spotted. A drawer in the bathroom that kept sticking no matter how carefully I closed it. Even the old hardwood in the upstairs hallway seemed to creak a little louder after midnight, as if the house itself was stretching and breathing along with us. One evening, as we all sat eating pizza straight from the box on the living room floor, the youngest looked up and asked, "Do you think the house likes us?" Everyone laughed, but for a moment, I wondered what stories the walls would tell if they could. There was a certain warmth to that idea, something comforting about feeling looked after, even if it was just our imaginations at play. And with every new day, that sense of possibility grew, one subtle step at a time. Of course, looking back, if I'd paid closer attention to those little signs, maybe I'd have noticed that not everything in our new home would stay ordinary. Because soon, those small, strange moments weren't so easy to brush off. So, what exactly happened to change everything? Well, that's where the real story begins. The first time it happened, I thought it was just the kids messing around, or maybe I hadn't paid enough attention. It was late, after midnight, but the hallway light was blazing, casting this harsh glow across the carpet and making the shadows crowd together. I was sure I'd flipped the switch off before heading to bed. Just to be certain, I flicked it off again, jiggled the knob a bit, and shuffled back to my room, telling myself I'd probably just forgotten. Still, lying awake, I kept replaying it in my mind. I could see that little red indicator on the switch, as clearly as if it were glowing right beside me. A couple nights later, there was this faint, almost rhythmic creaking coming from above the living room. I froze in the middle of brushing my teeth, just standing there, listening, toothbrush half raised, foam threatening to drip down my chin. The sound would stutter and stop, then start up again just as I'd think it was over. When I finally worked up the nerve to check, feet padded quietly down the hall. There was nothing. Not even a gust of wind outside. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. I told myself old homes have their own noises. People always say that, right? Houses settle, pipes groan, wood expands and contracts. That's what I repeated, sometimes out loud, like the sound of my own voice could talk away my worry. Still, the feeling that something wasn't quite right grew, sneaking into my chest every night while I turned off the lights and locked the doors. A few mornings later, the curtains in the living room were gently billowing, moving just enough to catch my eye as I came downstairs. I paused, feeling the floorboards cool under my feet. The windows were all closed. I checked every latch, even pressed my hand against the glass to be sure. But there was still this weird chill, a tiny breeze coming from somewhere I couldn't see. I wandered from room to room trying to sniff out a draft, hair on my arms prickling. All the while, the hallway light kept betraying me, shining its harsh white whenever I got up for a midnight drink of water. I started filming it with my phone, half thinking I'd catch a loose wire in the act, or maybe just have proof for myself that I wasn't going crazy. But there was nothing, just a perfectly ordinary light switch, unchanged in the daylight. Still, my sleep got patchier. I'd wake up and stare at the ceiling, counting the seconds it took for my heart to slow down. I grew more jumpy, glancing over my shoulder as I walked from room to room. Maybe it was because of the weird way sound seemed to carry through the walls, or how each night the silence would stretch just a little bit too far. I could almost hear my own heartbeat sometimes, pounding in my ears, loud as a drum. In the kitchen, I'd startle at the sudden pop of the refrigerator, or the way pipes clanged when the furnace kicked in. It was like the house was alive, just waiting for me to let my guard down. On rainy nights, the sense of unease deepened. Shadows grew longer, dancing across the living room walls as headlights splashed past outside. I'd wrap a blanket around my shoulders and sit on the edge of the couch, pretending to read while my mind wandered over every possibility. Loose windows, rogue breezes, failing wiring. I made lists, Googled fixes for every possible scenario. But a small part of me felt like the house was trying to tell me something, and I just wasn't listening hard enough. Sometimes, I'd catch the kids whispering in the hallway, eyes wide. They said they heard footsteps on the stairs or saw the door to the basement move. I wanted to soothe them, to promise there were no monsters in the dark, but even as I said the words, there was a little quiver in my voice I couldn't hide. I decided it was time to check the basement windows, to crawl along the wall and feel for cracks or drafty spots. I bundled up and ducked into the basement, my flashlight casting pale ovals across the cement floor. Downstairs, everything looked normal except for a handful of boxes toppled over from where I'd stacked them. Maybe I'd been careless. Or maybe the foundation wasn't quite as sturdy as I thought. The basement felt colder than ever. I had goosebumps up and down my arms, a shiver that wasn't just from the chill. I righted the boxes, ran my hand along the wall where the stone felt damp, and headed back upstairs, repeating my mantra, old house, old noises, everything's fine. But the weeks went by, and those little moments kept piling up. Sometimes I'd hear my name, spoken so softly I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. Other times, footsteps from empty rooms, or that persistent chill coiling around my ankles. It was becoming a pattern I couldn't ignore. Still, I told myself I just needed to get more rest, stay busy, keep moving forward. It wasn't until that one night, the night with the hallway light keeping its silent vigil long after I'd tried to sleep, that I finally admitted maybe, just maybe, something about this house wasn't as safe as I'd hoped. But what was I supposed to do about a feeling? I tried to tell friends, but they just laughed and told me I was letting my imagination get the best of me. Maybe they were right. Still, The tiny voice in the back of my head kept asking, what if they're not? What if there's something real happening here? Something I'm missing? And then everything changed. It happened on a Saturday morning, when the whole house was heavy with the smell of laundry detergent and freshly poured coffee. I was halfway down the stairs to the basement with a basket full of sheets and towels. The wooden steps creaked under my feet, and the air grew cooler the deeper I went. Something felt different. Thicker. I could almost taste the dust in the air. I paused and listened. There it was again. A faint shuffling, softer than a cat, coming from behind the dryer tucked near the far wall. My breath caught in my throat. At first I thought maybe a mouse got in. There's always a first for everything, right? But as I stepped closer, the shuffling stopped. The hair on my arms stood straight up. I waited, laundry basket pressed tight against my hip, heart racing so loud it sounded like thunder in my ears. The shadows in the corners seemed to ripple, swallowing the pale glow from the single light bulb overhead. I called out, just to be safe. Hello? My voice was thin, weak. The word barely made it across the cement floor. Then I heard it again. From behind the dryer, a sharper noise, like the scrape of a shoe. My mind went wild. Stranger, burglar, animal, ghost. I felt frozen, feet glued to the ground, every muscle tensed like a wound-up spring. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the dim puddle of light cast on the far side of the room. In that split second, I caught a glimpse. A hunched figure, half lit by the bulb, unmoving but clearly not a part of my family, or, honestly, my world. I dropped the laundry basket and felt it hit my shin, the sting barely registering. The stranger was there, crouched, hands pressed against their knees, head ducked low. We locked eyes. I couldn't look away. It was like my brain was refusing to process what I was seeing. Time slowed down. I remembered every detail. The old sneakers scuffed with mud, a jacket that looked shredded on one side, the wildness in those eyes. I tried to speak. My mouth felt like it was full of sand. What if they had a weapon? What if they'd been there for days and I never noticed? The questions tumbled through my mind, mixing fear with something burning. Anger. Maybe. Or just a desperate urge to protect my family, my home. My hands gripped the lip of the laundry basket so tightly my knuckles went white. My feet wanted to run, but my body stayed planted right where it was. The light buzzed overhead, flickering. For a second I wondered if I was dreaming, that it had all finally gotten to me. The stranger's breath fogged in the cold air, mixing with my own. Neither of us moved. In the chaos of seconds, I had to make a choice. I could turn, take off up the stairs, and just hope they didn't follow. Or I could try to outsmart them, to shout for help, or to grab something nearby, a broom, an old pair of pliers, anything to defend myself. Every possible outcome flashed through my mind. I heard my own heartbeat, felt it hammering inside my chest. Sweat dripped down the back of my neck, and still I didn't move. The stranger flinched suddenly, shrinking even lower to the ground. Maybe I was just as scary to them as they were to me. Or maybe not. The seconds stretched on, and every little sound was sharper than ever. The hum of the laundry machines, the tapping of water pipes, even the faint drip of condensation from somewhere deep in the basement maze. I thought of the kids, of their rooms upstairs, and the sounds they'd heard at night. What if this person had been here for days while I just went about my routines, feeling safe, not knowing there was someone hiding right beneath my feet? My stomach twisted, fear bubbling so intense I thought I might throw up. But something else rose up, too. A kind of cold, calm thread of determination. I wasn't going to let fear own me in my own house. The stranger blinked, and for the first time I thought I saw something almost human in their eyes. Fear, maybe. Confusion. Exhaustion. It wasn't enough to make me let my guard down. I took a slow step back, nerves screaming. Suddenly, the stranger shifted, glancing toward the basement stairs, and I saw a flash of something metallic in their hand. Panic exploded inside me. I fumbled for something, Anything. My hand closed on the old wooden broom leaning by the dryer. I lifted it, my arms shaking, ready to shout, to defend, to run, to do anything but just stand there. The light above us buzzed harder, a moth struggling around the bulb. Neither of us moved for what felt like a lifetime. I heard a car door slam out on the street, muffled through the basement windows. It was like the world outside was moving on, ordinary and safe, while everything down here had ground to a halt. I started to breathe again, each breath shallow and rough. What was the right move? Dash for the stairs and bolt the door, hope the police would come in time? Try to reason, talk, demand to know how they'd gotten in and for how long? Would shouting risk everything or save us all? My thoughts flashed back. Every weird creak, every flickering light, every cold draft, every moment that hadn't added up. Had I ignored all the signs? My heart pounded as I stared, sweat stinging my eyes, the laundry basket still at my feet. I was trapped halfway between fight and flight, unsure what the next second would bring. The question is, why? But before that moment, I'd always believed my home was safe, a place where the scariest thing was running out of clean socks. In that instant, though, all of that disappeared. I was reminded of a story my neighbor, Mrs. Ortiz, had told me just last week about how, years ago, she found footprints in her garage and locked herself in the bathroom until her husband came home. I'd laughed it off back then, thinking it'd never happened to me. But now, standing 10 feet from a real, living threat, I understood exactly what she must have felt. The dizzy, sick fear, the helplessness, the sense that safety is just an illusion. I could smell the sharp sting of metal from the pipes, mixed with the slightly sour scent of dirty laundry in the air. The silence between us pressed in tighter, broken only by the small, frightened noises we both made. My shaky breaths, their throat clearing, the soft brush of their sleeve against the concrete wall. I wanted to shout, to break the silence, but my voice felt trapped somewhere in my chest. Then, almost like a reflex, I remembered what I'd seen on a true crime show. How the experts always said to stay calm, to let the intruder know you were aware, but not aggressive. So, in the quietest voice I could manage, I tried again. Please, what do you want? My words trembled, but somehow they filled the room. The person let out a choked sound, barely more than a whisper. I am sorry. I didn't mean. They broke off, voice hoarse, eyes flickering toward the stairs and then back to me. There was something broken in them, something desperate. But I didn't drop the broom. I wouldn't, not until I knew for sure. My grip tightened, palms slick with sweat, muscles still coiled. I could almost hear my blood rushing in my ears. I wanted to do 100 things at once, call for help, rush up the stairs, demand answers, even just slam the basement door shut and pretend the whole nightmare away. But every second stretched, and the next move felt more important than anything I'd ever done. Suddenly, I thought about what I'd do if the roles were reversed. What if this was someone lost, alone, hiding from something worse upstairs? Was it possible? Or was that just wishful thinking trying to drown out my panic? Every sense was sharpened. The gray light of the dangling bulb flickering over the old paint cans and stacks of boxes. Even the seams in the concrete floor seemed to pulse under my feet. I noticed details I usually missed. The calendar tacked to the wall from 3 years ago, the dent in the dryer door, the way one of my son's old toys poked out from a heap in the corner. My brain screamed for action, now, before anything changed, before they could attack or escape. Should I trust my instincts? Should I hold my ground and wait for a break in the standoff? Or was this the chance to run? I could feel our eyes still locked, the gap between us thick with questions. What did they want? How had they gotten in? Why here? Why now? The silence pressed in, pulsing with tension as the world held its breath. What happened next would change everything. But before I made my move, I needed just one answer. And that's when I realized, you never really know what you're capable of. until you're forced to find out. So, what happened next? Well, that's where things got really interesting. As I sat on the edge of the stairs, still gripping that beat-up broomstick, 1,000 swirling thoughts almost drowned out everything else. My pulse hammered against my ribs, every breath shallow, almost burning in my throat. I remember tracing the grain of the broom handle with my thumb, the wood rough and warm from where I'd clutched it so tightly. Damned thing had never seemed so heavy. For a moment, it hit me just how thin the line was, between routine and chaos, between feeling safe and being completely exposed. It felt like the whole scene was happening to someone else, on a movie screen in slow motion, like those crime shows where you yell at the character not to go down the dark hallway. But this was my hallway, my home, my fight. The fluorescent bulb on the ceiling buzzed softly, flickering every few seconds, its pale light casting strange shadows on the cement walls. Even the air tasted different, metal and cold, tinged with a sharp scent I couldn't name. Maybe fear. Maybe the earthiness from the intruder's muddy boots. After the stranger vanished, I kept replaying those last moments in my head. Why had they hesitated? Were they scared of me, too? Just another desperate person lost in a world that didn't care. It reminded me of a story my neighbor Mrs. Raj once told, about finding someone sleeping in her garden shed during a bad winter. She'd offered him a sandwich, locked the shed door, and called for help. Different choices, maybe, but the same kind of fear. The kind that makes you question what you'd actually do if pushed. That experience brought me back to a time years ago when my dad's shop had been broken into. He used to say, "Locks only keep out the honest ones." The night we found the smashed window at his store, Dad walked through every aisle, cataloging the mess, his shoulders set and jaw clenched. I was just a kid, but I felt it, the sense of being invaded, of something precious being trampled. Now I finally understood what he meant. It's not about the stuff, it's about losing a bit of trust, of innocence, to the unknown. Back in my own kitchen, the clock ticked louder than usual. My phone kept buzzing, first with texts, then calls from family who'd heard the sirens or seen the flashes from the police cars. It's strange how quickly these things become stories people tell. Someone broke into Sam's house last night. They'd whisper, "Did you hear he confronted the guy himself?" Some said I was brave, others thought I took a foolish risk. My aunt sent a text, "Next time, just lock yourself in the bedroom, honey. Nothing in the basement is worth your safety." But what do you do in a moment like that? My brother called and said, "I don't know if I'd have had the guts to stand my ground like that." I laughed, but inside, I was still unraveling. The truth is, I didn't feel brave at all. I felt shaken, like the ground could open up again any minute. I spent hours pacing the halls that night, checking door handles, tightening screws on the window locks Dad had installed years before. Each time I passed the basement door, my body tensed up. I'd listen for the smallest sound, a breath, a creak, the world trying to slip back into dangerous shapes. The next day, the officer came by to follow up. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You handled an impossible situation. But don't let it eat away at you. Most people freeze. You did what you had to do." Her words echoed in my head. Maybe there's no right way to face fear. Maybe the only thing you can do is keep moving. Make your home your own again. After a while, though, something shifted. Instead of just feeling scared, I found myself wanting to do more. Not just to patch up my doors, but to talk with neighbors. To look out for each other, the way we used to. I called a few folks down the street, suggested we check up on each other's places once in a while, or start a group chat for emergencies. Some actually thanked me, saying they'd felt uneasy too, especially lately. That sense of control, even in small ways, began to ease my nerves. And yet, the question kept tugging at me, prickling my skin late at night. What else could I have done? How can I make sure nothing like this ever happens again? How do you go back to normal when you know how quickly everything can change? But this isn't where the story ends. Because facing fear isn't just about surviving a single night. It's about what you do after, every day, to reclaim your sense of safety. So how do you turn that fear into action and move forward for good? Let's dig into that next. The days after the break-in were the longest I've ever known. When the police left and the house was finally quiet, it was almost too quiet, like the silence was just waiting for me to breathe too loudly. I kept replaying every moment in my head, wondering if I could have done something different, something that would have kept that stranger out in the first place. The fear stuck around, but as the shock faded, something else took its place, a fierce determination not to let this happen to my family again. Emotions swirled together, relief that we were safe, anger that someone had invaded our space, gratitude for the quick response of our neighbors and local police. Most of all, though, I felt a heavy kind of responsibility. This was my house, my job to protect the people and the memories inside. I knew I had to act, not just worry. So I started outside, right at the point of entry. That basement window, once just a forgotten spot behind a stack of boxes, got reinforced with a sturdy metal grate and a new lock. I spent an entire afternoon at the hardware store, probably looking a little wild-eyed while I grilled the staff about the best security cameras and deadbolts. They didn't laugh, honestly. They seemed to get it. Turns out, lots of people only think about security when something finally goes wrong. I installed motion-sensing lights near every door and along the path to the basement. At first, it seemed kind of extreme, but when I saw that first camera light flick on, I actually felt the knot in my stomach start to loosen. Next, I set up a smart security system that sends alerts straight to my phone. So now, I'd always know if anything was out of place, even while lying in bed. I walked through the house at dusk, checking every window, every door. I patched the gaps, replaced screws, even greased the locks so they'd slide quietly but securely. There was no way I was leaving anything to chance. But it wasn't just gadgets that made the difference. After the break-in, my family came together in ways I hadn't expected. The kids learned not to ignore strange noises, and we all set up new routines, double-checking doors before bed, talking through what we'd do if we ever felt unsafe. I even talked to our new neighbors, sharing what had happened just in case. Turns out, a lot of them had their own scary stories. We started a group chat to keep each other updated about anything odd. The feeling of community, that we could watch out for each other, was almost as comforting as the new locks. As I looked back on the changes, I realized just how much control we actually have over our safety, if we're willing to pay attention. I wish I'd listened to the hints from the start. The flickering lights, the drafts, the uneasy feeling that something wasn't quite right. If you get that feeling in your home, even just a twinge of unease, trust your instincts. It's always better to double-check and maybe feel a little silly than to ignore a real threat. I want to share a few steps that helped us reclaim our sense of safety. First, walk through your entire home. Check all entry points, not just the main doors, but every window, even the small ones tucked behind bushes or under decks. Make sure there are working locks, and if anything feels flimsy, replace it right away. Don't forget the garage or any basement windows, especially if they're out of sight from the street. Invest in good outside lighting. Shadows make it easy for intruders to hide, but a bright motion-activated light will send them running. Cameras help too. Even just one facing your front entry can make a world of difference. If you have an old-school alarm system, test it and update the code. If you don't have one, consider getting something easy to manage from your phone. You'll always know what's happening at home, even if you're away. Inside, make nightly routines for locking up. Get everyone involved. The more eyes and hands double-checking, the less likely anything will be missed. Teach kids the difference between normal house noises and something new. Don't brush off their worries. Fear is there for a reason, and even if it turns out to be nothing, you'll be glad you checked. Most importantly, talk to your neighbors. If you see something strange, say something. Community means safety, and speaking up might prevent the next break-in. Get to know who lives nearby and what their routines are. The more familiar people are watching, the safer everyone will feel. Looking back, I see just how much we grew. not just in how we protect our house, but in how we look after each other. I don't take anything for granted now, not even the quiet evenings when nothing seems to happen. That's what matters most. Not letting fear rule, but learning what it can teach you. If you have stories or tips about protecting your home, I really want to hear them. Drop them in the comments below. Your experience could help someone else before it's too late. So what else don't we know about the places we call home? Maybe it's not about locking ourselves away, but about learning how to open our eyes and protect what matters most.